The CEO froze outside the boardroom when he overheard the janitor calmly negotiating in 3 different languages while mopping the floor. Her accent was perfect, her tone confident, and nothing about it matched the role he had assigned her in his mind. That single moment set off a chain of events no one in the office saw coming. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you stories like this one, and it means the world to us. Now let's get back to what happened next. His name was Michael Bradford, and he'd been CEO of Titanium Solutions for 8 years. The company specialized in international tech consulting, with offices in 14 countries and annual revenue pushing past $2 billion. Michael had built his reputation on being sharp, decisive, and perhaps most importantly, observant. He prided himself on reading people, on noticing details others missed. Yet somehow for the past 4 years, he'd walked past the same woman every evening without truly seeing her. Her name was Lena Kovac, though he wouldn't learn that until much later. To him, she was simply part of the scenery, one of the evening cleaning staff who materialized after business hours to empty trash cans and vacuum conference rooms. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, always wore the same dark blue uniform, kept her graying hair tied back in a practical bun, and moved through the offices with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned not to be noticed. Michael had probably passed her hundreds of times. He might have nodded once or twice in that absent way people acknowledge service workers without really acknowledging them at all. But he'd never stopped to talk to her, never asked her name, never wondered about the person behind the uniform. That was about to change in a way that would shake his understanding of his own company and himself. It was a Tuesday evening, nearly 8 o'clock, and Michael was still at the office because a crucial deal was falling apart. Titanium Solutions was in the final stages of acquiring a German engineering firm, a partnership that would expand their European operations significantly. The problem was communication. Their lead negotiator had misunderstood several key terms in the German contract, creating confusion and mistrust. Their translator had caught some of the errors but not all of them. Now the German executives were threatening to walk away, insulted by what they perceived as incompetence or worse, deliberate misrepresentation. Michael had spent the last 2 hours on calls trying to salvage the situation, but his German was limited to basic pleasantries and business jargon. He needed someone who truly understood the language, the legal terminology, the cultural nuances. His head of international operations had left for the day. His translator was unreachable. He was standing in the hallway outside the main boardroom, phone pressed to his ear, listening to his German counterpart express increasing frustration when he heard it. A voice, female, speaking fluent German. Not the hesitant, textbook German of someone who'd taken classes. The smooth, native-level German of someone who'd lived the language. He turned toward the sound and saw her. The janitor, Lena, was at the far end of the hall with her cleaning cart, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapid German to someone. Her tone was warm but firm, the way you'd speak to a family member who needed both reassurance and a reality check. Michael couldn't make out all the words from this distance, but he caught enough to recognize sophisticated vocabulary, complex sentence structures, the kind of language fluency you couldn't fake. She ended the call and immediately made another one, this time speaking in what sounded like French. Again, the fluency was remarkable. She laughed at something the other person said, responded with what sounded like a joke, then switched gears into what seemed like serious advice giving. Michael stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, his German colleague still talking, but Michael wasn't listening anymore. He was watching the janitor conduct 2 separate conversations in 2 different languages with the ease of someone changing television channels. She hung up and noticed him staring. For a moment, their eyes met across the hallway. She looked startled, like someone caught doing something they shouldn't, even though she'd done nothing wrong. She quickly pocketed her phone and returned to mopping the floor, her head down, her movements careful. Michael ended his call with a distracted goodbye and walked toward her. She didn't look up as he approached, just kept pushing the mop across the already clean floor. He realized she was nervous. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentler than he'd intended. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, sir?" Her English carried a slight accent he couldn't immediately place. "Eastern European, maybe. I couldn't help but overhear. Were you speaking German just now?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." "And French?" "Yes." "Where did you learn?" She glanced at her mop, then back at him as if calculating how much truth was safe to share. "I grew up speaking multiple languages." "How many?" "I'm sorry?" "How many languages do you speak?" The question seemed to surprise her. She paused for a long moment before answering. "9, sir." Michael felt his eyebrows rise involuntarily. 9 languages? Yes. Which ones? Croatian is my first language. Then Serbian, German, Italian, French, English, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic. She listed them with no pride, no false modesty, just stating facts. Michael's mind was racing. 9 languages. Perfect fluency in German and French based on what he'd just heard. And she'd been mopping his floors for 4 years. What's your name? Lena. Lena Kovac. Lena, I have a situation. A serious one. Our acquisition deal with a German company is falling apart because of communication issues. I need someone who can review a contract, understand legal and technical German, and help me figure out what went wrong. Can you do that? She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly. But also something like wariness, as if she'd been disappointed before. I can try, sir. I'm not asking if you can try. I'm asking if you're qualified. I have a law degree from the University of Zagreb. I worked as a translator and legal consultant for 8 years before I came to this country. I'm familiar with contract law in both European and American contexts. Yes, I'm qualified. Her voice was steady now, no longer deferential. She was answering as the professional she apparently was, not the janitor she appeared to be. Michael felt something shift in his chest, an uncomfortable mixture of embarrassment and urgency. Come with me, please. He turned and walked toward the boardroom without waiting to see if she'd follow. After a moment, he heard the soft squeak of wheels as she pushed her cleaning cart to the side of the hallway and the quiet footsteps of someone following. The boardroom was exactly as he'd left it, papers scattered across the long table, his laptop open to the disputed contract. He gestured to a chair. Sit, please. Lena sat carefully on the edge of the leather chair, her uniform a stark contrast to the expensive furnishings. Michael pulled up the contract on his laptop and turned it toward her. This is the section that's causing problems. Our German partners are saying we misunderstood clauses 7 through 12. Our translator says the language is clear. The Germans say we're either incompetent or dishonest. I need to know what's actually written here. Lena leaned forward and began reading. Her eyes moved across the screen with practiced speed, occasionally pausing, occasionally scrolling back to reread something. Michael watched her face. She was completely focused, her expression serious and professional. This was not the same person who'd been nervously mopping the floor 5 minutes ago. After several minutes, she sat back. Your translator missed the nuance. The German text uses a specific legal construction that changes the meaning slightly from the English interpretation. In Clause 7, the word Verpflichtung doesn't just mean obligation in the general sense. In this legal context, it implies a binding commitment with potential penalty clauses that your English version doesn't capture. Clause 9 uses Versicherung, which your translator rendered as assurance, but in German contract law, it's closer to warranty with legal weight. The Germans think you're agreeing to terms you're actually trying to dilute in translation. Michael leaned back in his chair. Can you fix it? I can draft language that captures the true intent while making clear what you are and aren't agreeing to. But I need to know what your actual position is on these clauses. For the next hour, Michael explained the company's position while Lena took notes in what he assumed was Croatian, her handwriting small and precise. She asked sharp questions about liability limits, timeline commitments, and penalty structures. Her questions were better than those his lawyers had asked. She understood not just language but business implications. When she had what she needed, she asked if she could use his laptop. He nodded and watched as she began typing, switching between German and English with fluid ease. She muttered to herself occasionally in what sounded like Italian, as if thinking through problems in different linguistic frameworks. 20 minutes later, she turned the laptop back to him. I've revised clauses 7 through 12 in both German and English, making sure they're truly equivalent. I've also added clarifying language to 3 other clauses that weren't causing problems yet but would have eventually. The German is legally precise and culturally appropriate. If you send this to your partners, they'll see that you understand both the language and the substance. Michael read through her work. Even with his limited German, he could see the difference. The language was more precise, more formal, more respectful. The English version was equally clear. This is exceptional work. Thank you, sir. Lena, I have to ask. If you're this qualified, why are you working as a janitor? The question hung in the air between them. Lena's expression closed off slightly, the professional mask slipping back into something more guarded. Because when I came to this country 12 years ago as a refugee from the Yugoslav wars, nobody cared about my law degree. Nobody cared that I'd been a respected professional in Zagreb. I was just another immigrant with an accent and credentials that didn't translate. I applied to hundreds of positions. Law firms, corporations, translation agencies. Nobody would hire me. They said my English wasn't good enough, even though I spoke it fluently. They said my experience wasn't relevant, even though law is law. They said I'd need to go back to school, take American exams, start over. I had 2 children to feed and rent to pay. I couldn't afford to start over. So I took the job I could get. Cleaning paid enough to keep my family housed and fed. It had health insurance. It asked nothing of me except physical work, which meant I had energy left over to be a mother when I got home. After a while, I stopped trying to be seen as anything else. It was easier to be invisible. Michael felt the weight of her words settle over him. How many times had he complained about labor shortages, about the difficulty of finding qualified people, while someone with 9 languages and a law degree was cleaning his toilet? Things are about to change, he said quietly. He picked up his phone and called his head of international operations, Richard Chin, waking him from sleep. Richard, I need you back in the office. No, I don't care that it's 8:30. This is urgent. 40 minutes later, Richard arrived, looking rumpled and confused. Michael had spent the interim sending Lena's revised contract to the German partners and receiving an almost immediate response. The tone had shifted from hostile to respectful. They appreciated the clarifications and were willing to continue negotiations. Crisis averted. When Richard walked into the boardroom and saw Lena sitting at the table in her cleaning uniform, his confusion deepened. Michael, what's going on? Richard, this is Lena Kovac. She speaks 9 languages, has a law degree, and just saved our German acquisition. Lena, this is Richard Chin, head of international operations. Richard, sit down. We need to talk about how we've been running this company. For the next 30 minutes, Michael explained what had happened. Richard's expression cycled through disbelief, embarrassment, and growing excitement. When Michael finished, Richard turned to Lena. You speak 9 languages fluently? Yes. Including Arabic? Yes, modern standard Arabic and 2 dialects. We've been trying to break into the Middle Eastern market for 2 years. We keep hitting cultural and linguistic barriers. Our translators are competent, but they don't understand business context. Could you help with that? Lena glanced at Michael, then back at Richard. I could, but I'm not sure what you're asking me. Michael leaned forward. Lena, I'm offering you a position. Director of International Communications and Cultural Integration. You'd be responsible for overseeing all our translation needs, training our teams on cultural competency, and directly supporting high-stakes negotiations in any of the 9 languages you speak. The salary would be commensurate with the position, significantly more than you're making now. You'd have an office on this floor, full benefits, and my personal commitment that we'll support whatever you need to be successful here. Lena sat very still. Mr. Bradford, I appreciate this, but people will have questions. They'll wonder why the cleaning woman suddenly has an executive position. They'll make assumptions. Let them, Michael said firmly. Anyone who has an issue can come talk to me directly. You earned this position tonight, and frankly, you earned it 4 years ago when we were too blind to notice you. The only question that matters is whether you want it. Lena's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, but her voice was steady. I want it. Good. Take tomorrow off. Come back Thursday and we'll get everything formalized with HR. And Lena, thank you for speaking up tonight when you could have stayed invisible. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she stood, smoothed her uniform, and walked out of the boardroom with her head higher than when she'd entered. The next morning, Michael called an emergency meeting with his senior leadership team. 7 executives gathered in the boardroom, all of them looking concerned about being summoned with no agenda. Michael stood at the head of the table and began without preamble. I'm about to tell you something that should embarrass all of us. For 4 years, we've employed a woman with 9 languages and a law degree to empty our trash cans. Her name is Lena Kovac, and starting Thursday, she'll be our new Director of International Communications and Cultural Integration. The room erupted in questions. Michael raised his hand for silence and explained the previous night's events. When he finished, his CFO, Margaret Torres, spoke carefully. Michael, I don't doubt her qualifications based on what you're describing, but this is highly irregular. We have hiring procedures, interview processes, background checks. We can't just promote a janitor to director level because of one good conversation. You're absolutely right, Margaret. We can't. Which is why HR will do a full background verification, we'll review her credentials properly, and we'll formalize everything through proper channels. But make no mistake, this is happening. And if any of you have a problem with it, I suggest you examine why we let someone this qualified go unnoticed for 4 years. The head of HR, David Okafor, cleared his throat. Michael, I pulled her employment file this morning after you called me. She listed all her qualifications on her initial application. Her law degree, her languages, her work experience. It's all documented. We have it on file. The room went silent. So you're telling me, Michael said slowly, that she told us exactly who she was when we hired her, and we still put her in a cleaning position? The hiring manager at the time noted that her qualifications were overqualified for custodial work, but that she specifically requested evening shift work with flexible hours due to family obligations. He assumed she needed a simple job and didn't follow up on whether she might be suited for something else. Michael felt anger rising, not at any one person but at the system, at the assumptions, at the waste of it all. That changes now. David, I want you to review the files of every single employee in non-professional roles. I want to know if we have anyone else whose qualifications don't match their position. I want to know if we're overlooking talent anywhere else in this company. That's several hundred employee files, Michael. Then you'd better get started. Over the next week, the story of Lena's promotion spread through the company like wildfire. Reactions were mixed. Some employees were genuinely excited, viewing it as an inspiring story of hidden talent being recognized. Others were resentful, seeing it as unfair that someone could skip the usual career progression. The gossip was intense. Michael heard fragments of it as he walked through the office. Some people claimed Lena had manipulated her way into the position. Others suggested there must be some personal relationship between her and Michael. The speculation was ugly and entirely predictable. Michael addressed it head-on in a company-wide meeting. I know there's been talk about Lena Kovac's promotion. Let me be extremely clear. Lena was hired 4 years ago as custodial staff because that's the position she applied for, needing flexible evening hours to care for her family. What I failed to do, was look beyond the position to see the person. She has qualifications that exceed those of many people in senior positions in this company. The only thing that's changed is that we're finally using her skills appropriately. If anyone has concerns about this, my door is open. But if I hear that anyone is treating Lena with anything less than the respect she's earned, there will be consequences. Thursday morning, Lena arrived at 9 o'clock wearing professional clothes that looked new, her hair styled differently, walking with visible nervousness toward the executive floor. Michael met her at reception personally and walked her to her new office. It was a corner office with windows overlooking the city, furnished simply but professionally. On the desk was a nameplate engraved with her name and title. Lena touched it gently as if making sure it was real. This is really happening, she said softly. It's really happening. Are you ready? She looked at him with an expression that was both vulnerable and determined. I've been ready for 12 years. Her first test came sooner than anyone expected. The following Monday, Titanium Solutions was scheduled to have a crucial video conference with potential partners in Saudi Arabia. The partnership could open up the entire Middle Eastern market but required delicate cultural negotiation. Their usual consultant had canceled due to a family emergency, and they were scrambling for alternatives. Richard Chin came to Michael's office looking stressed. The Saudi call is in 2 hours and our cultural consultant just canceled. I can try to handle it myself, but my Arabic is minimal and I'm going to offend someone. Use Lena. She just started. Is she ready for something this important? Let's ask her. They found Lena in her office, reviewing training materials David had provided about company policies. Michael explained the situation. Lena listened carefully, then nodded. I can do this, but I'll need 30 minutes to review your proposal documents and understand what you're trying to achieve. I also need to know your flexibility on various points so I can navigate the conversation appropriately. 2 hours later, Lena sat in a conference room with Richard, Michael, and 2 other executives, facing a screen showing 5 Saudi businessmen in Riyadh. Lena greeted them in formal Arabic, using the appropriate terms of respect and cultural pleasantries. The Saudis looked surprised and pleased. For the next 90 minutes, Lena facilitated a conversation that went far beyond simple translation. When the Americans made a point that could be perceived as culturally insensitive, she rephrased it in a way that preserved the meaning while respecting Saudi cultural norms. When the Saudis expressed concerns indirectly, as is common in high-context Middle Eastern communication, she caught the subtext and made sure the Americans understood what was really being said. At one point, one of the Saudi executives asked her directly in Arabic about her background. She responded smoothly, explaining her education and experience, then made a light joke about the journey from Yugoslav lawyer to American executive that made them all laugh. The cultural bridge she built was visible. By the end of the call, the Saudis had agreed to a pilot program that exceeded what the Americans had hoped to achieve. After they disconnected, Richard sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. That was incredible. You didn't just translate, you conducted that entire negotiation. That's what I was trained to do, Lena said simply. In Zagreb, I spent years facilitating international business deals. This is what I'm good at. Michael looked at Richard. I think we've been underutilizing our international operations because we've been under-equipped for cultural complexity. That changes now. Over the next 3 months, Lena transformed how Titanium Solutions approached international business. She built a team of cultural consultants and translators, insisting on hiring people with actual lived experience in the cultures they represented, not just language degrees. She created training programs for executives on cultural competency. She personally supported negotiations in Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and 3 Middle Eastern countries. Every deal she touched seemed to go more smoothly. Revenue from international operations increased by 18% in her first quarter. But perhaps more importantly, she changed the culture internally. David Okafor had completed his review of employee files and found 12 people in non-professional roles who had significant qualifications being underutilized. A security guard who'd been an electrical engineer in Syria. A cafeteria worker with an accounting degree from Venezuela. A mailroom clerk who'd been a teacher in the Philippines. Lena worked with HR to create pathways for these employees to transition into roles that matched their capabilities. She called it the Second Chance Initiative, though Michael pointed out that for many of these people, it was really a first chance in America. The initiative became a model. Other companies heard about it and started examining their own workforces. Media outlets picked up the story. Lena was invited to speak at conferences about immigrant talent and workforce development. She always accepted, always spoke passionately, and always ended with the same point. The talent is already here, you just have to be willing to see it. 6 months after her promotion, Titanium Solutions held its annual shareholder meeting. Michael invited Lena to present on the international operations expansion. She stood before 300 investors and analysts and told her story without self-pity or resentment, simply laying out the facts. She'd been invisible for 4 years. One moment of being seen had changed everything, not just for her but for the company. The international revenue growth spoke for itself. When she finished, the room gave her a standing ovation. An investor approached her afterward, an older woman who introduced herself as Helen Pritchard, founder of a major venture capital firm. Miss Kovac, that was one of the most powerful presentations I've seen in 40 years of attending these meetings. Tell me, what was the hardest part of those 4 years working as a janitor? Lena considered the question carefully. The hardest part wasn't the physical work. It wasn't even the low pay. It was the invisibility. It was watching people have conversations I could have contributed to, seeing problems I could have solved, and knowing that speaking up would seem presumptuous. It was training myself not to offer expertise because nobody wanted it from someone in a blue uniform. The hardest part was learning to make myself small when I knew I was capable of being large. Helen nodded slowly. And now? Now I make sure nobody else has to make themselves small. That's what the Second Chance Initiative is about. Recognizing that talent doesn't always come with the right resume or the right background or the right accent. Sometimes it comes pushing a cleaning cart. You just have to look. One evening, about 8 months after her promotion, Lena was working late in her office when she heard the sound of a vacuum cleaner in the hallway. She got up and found one of the evening cleaning staff, a young woman named Amira who Lena recognized from her own time on the custodial team. Lena greeted her warmly in Arabic. Amira looked startled, then pleased. They talked for a few minutes, Amira explaining that she was from Syria, that she'd been a pharmacist before the war, that she'd been in America for 3 years and was still trying to figure out how to rebuild her career. Lena asked if she'd be willing to have coffee sometime to discuss options. Amira's eyes filled with tears. You were like me, she said in Arabic. You understand. I understand, Lena confirmed. And I promise you, you won't be invisible forever. 2 weeks later, Amira was enrolled in a program to get her pharmacy credentials recognized in the United States, with Titanium Solutions providing financial support through a new scholarship fund Lena had established. It was funded partially by the company and partially by Lena herself, who'd started donating a portion of her new salary to help others make the transition she'd been lucky enough to make. Michael watched all of this unfold with a mixture of pride and ongoing discomfort. Pride in what Lena had accomplished and what the company was becoming. discomfort at how close they'd come to never discovering her. One afternoon, he asked her to come to his office. "Lena, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you resent us?" "For those 4 years." She thought about it for a long moment. "I did at first. When you first promoted me, I felt angry about all the wasted time. But I've come to see it differently. Those 4 years taught me things I needed to know. They taught me humility. They taught me to see people who others overlook. They gave me credibility with people like Amira who are living what I lived. I wouldn't have the same perspective without that experience. So no, I don't resent it anymore. I've made peace with it. You're more generous than I would be. Maybe. Or maybe I just understand that life doesn't follow straight lines. Sometimes you have to go backward to go forward. Sometimes you have to be invisible before you can be truly seen." A year after Lena's promotion, Titanium Solutions won a major industry award for innovation in workforce development, specifically citing the Second Chance initiative. At the award ceremony, Michael insisted that Lena accept the award, not him. She stood on stage holding the glass trophy and said something that would be quoted in business schools for years afterward. "This award isn't for discovering talent. It's for finally opening our eyes to talent that was already there. The innovation wasn't in the program. The innovation was in the simple act of seeing people as they actually are rather than as we assume them to be. That's not innovation. That's just basic human decency. We shouldn't get awards for it. We should expect it." The audience applauded, but Lena's words carried a challenge that some people in that room found uncomfortable. After the ceremony, several CEOs approached her to ask about implementing similar programs. She was always willing to help, but she always asked them the same question first. "Are you ready to be wrong about people? Because that's what this requires. Being willing to discover that the person you've been overlooking is actually extraordinary." Some of them were ready. Some weren't. Lena could always tell which was which. 2 years after her promotion, Lena was named Vice President of Global Operations, the highest position ever held by a former custodial worker at a Fortune 500 company. On her first day in the new role, she did something unusual. She spent her lunch hour in the building's lower level, eating with the custodial staff in their break room. She did this once a month without fail, maintaining connections with the people who understood a part of her story that nobody in the executive suite could fully grasp. One of the longtime janitors, a man named Jose who'd worked alongside Lena years ago, asked her once why she kept coming back down to their level. "You made it," he said. "You don't have to remember where you came from." "That's exactly why I have to remember," Lena replied. "Because the moment I forget is the moment I stop seeing the next person who needs to be seen." She never forgot. And because she never forgot, dozens of other people got chances they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Engineers who'd been driving Uber. Doctors who'd been working retail. Teachers who'd been serving coffee. All of them had been invisible until someone finally looked. That someone was usually Lena. Years later, Michael Bradford would say in interviews that promoting Lena Kovac was the best business decision he ever made, not because of the revenue growth or the awards, but because it changed how he saw everything. It taught him that the most valuable resources in any organization are often the ones you're not even looking for. They're the ones quietly doing their jobs, not asking for recognition, not demanding to be seen. They're the ones you walk past every day without wondering who they really are or what they're really capable of. The janitor speaking 9 languages while mopping the floor wasn't an anomaly. She was a reminder that brilliance doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with credentials and corner offices and impressive job titles. Sometimes it comes with a mop and a blue uniform and an accent that makes people underestimate you. Sometimes it's been there all along, waiting patiently for someone to finally stop and listen. The CEO froze outside the boardroom when he overheard the janitor calmly negotiating in 3 different languages while mopping the floor, and that moment changed everything. But the truth is, she'd been extraordinary the entire time. He just finally learned to see it.